Picture the hardwood floor in the late 1980s. Playing the Detroit Pistons wasn't basketball. It was a test of survival. Opponents arrived at the arena already defeated, dreading a roster built entirely on intimidation. Detroit turned the sport into a combat zone. Yet, hiding in plain sight among these enforcers was a figure who broke every stereotype. Joe Dumars did not throw punches. He did not scream at referees. He ignored the trash talk echoing through the stadium tunnels. He was polite, quiet, and moved with a grace that felt entirely out of place. But that polite exterior was a mask hiding a cold-blooded defensive assassin. In Michael Jordan's own memoirs published in 1998, the Chicago superstar stated that the smartest, most frustrating defender he ever faced was not a muscle-bound enforcer, but Joe Dumars. This begs a serious question. How could the quietest guy on the court become a nightmare for the greatest scorer of all time? What was Dumars doing in the shadows that cameras failed to capture? League penalty logs from the 1988 to 1989 season reveal a strange anomaly. While his teammates racked up dozens of technical fouls and thousands of dollars in fines, Joe Dumars received virtually zero disciplinary actions for dirty play. He operated in the exact same defensive system, guarding the most dangerous opponents, yet his record remained spotless. A suspicion immediately arises. How is it possible to be the primary weapon of a notorious gang and consistently walk away with clean hands? Was he manipulating the referees with his gentlemanly reputation? To figure out how this quiet anomaly learned to dismantle stars without leaving a trace of evidence, we have to open the scouting reports from the spring of 1985. The professional draft is supposed to be a televised spectacle where the stars of tomorrow step into the national spotlight. But in the mid-1980s, the scouting system was heavily biased toward prestigious universities. Deep in Louisiana, playing for the obscure McNeese State University, Joe Dumars operated in total isolation. He was a phantom to the national press. He wasn't invited to promotional events, and his face never appeared on sports magazines. He built a lethal skill set in the shadows. Archived draft tables from June of 1985 present a shocking piece of evidence. Joe Dumars was not fought over by elite teams. He was selected with the 18th overall pick. 17 different franchises, armed with millions of dollars in scouting budgets, looked at his profile and passed. Who dropped the ball here? How could a player with the intelligence to eventually become a finals most valuable player be ignored by almost the entire league? Was there a deliberate cover-up of his potential, or were scouts simply too lazy to travel to the bayou? His college statistics only deepen the mystery. Collegiate records published at the time show Dumars averaging over 25 points per game in his senior year. Yet broadcasting networks ignored these numbers. The data showed a rising star, but the narrative erased him. Why did the media refuse to look at the math? Detroit's general manager Jack McCloskey saw his potential, bringing him to a city that would forge him into a weapon. But the first day Dumars stepped into the Detroit training camp in the fall of 1985, the reality became clear. He had to become a predator, or be eaten alive by his own teammates. Walking into that Detroit locker room in the mid-1980s felt like walking into a holding cell. It was an ecosystem dominated by egos and aggression. Veterans like Isiah Thomas ruled with a smile, while Bill Laimbeer acted as the unsmiling enforcer. For a polite rookie from Louisiana, the culture shock must have been paralyzing. Practice sessions were exhausting wars of attrition where elbows were thrown, and the coaching staff simply turned a blind eye. Show an ounce of weakness, and you were targeted. Dumars had to make an immediate choice. He could hold on to his morals and be destroyed, or adapt and become a silent predator in a jungle of screaming beasts. The cruelty was an organized system. Recorded podcast conversations featuring former Pistons players revealed that the team implemented an internal financial structure. Players were forced to pay fines of $50 if they were caught helping an opponent off the floor. That was a literal tax on human decency. How does a decent guy survive a system that financially penalizes compassion? Did he sacrifice his morals to fit in, or did he learn to wear a mask of compliance? The architect of this madness stood on the sidelines, manipulating the psychology of his players. Unedited press conference transcripts of head coach Chuck Daly from the winter of 1987 capture the moment his basketball terminology shifted to militaristic rhetoric. He stopped talking about defensive rotations and demanded his players punish anyone who entered the painted area. Daly was transforming a sports team into a mercenary squad. Dumars did not rebel. He internalized the defensive intensity with discipline. This calculated obedience would soon lay the groundwork for the most controversial defensive document ever drawn up in the history of the sport. The late 1980s brought a new phenomenon to professional basketball. A high-flying force from Chicago named Michael Jordan turned elite defenders into helpless props. The Detroit front office realized traditional strategies were useless against a man who defied gravity. They needed a specialized weapon to break the spirit of this one individual. This desperate need birthed the infamous tactical doctrine known as the Jordan Rules. But a system of physical intimidation requires a technician to execute the first, crucial step. That burden fell on Joe Dumars. Pages of Sam Smith's investigative book, published in 1991, expose the inner workings of this brutal strategy. The scheme relied on pushing the superstar toward the baseline, where heavy enforcers waited to trap him. But why did a quiet player become the cornerstone of a strategy designed to punish a man? The secret was hidden in the footwork. While the rest of the roster relied on brute strength, Dumars possessed a precise understanding of defensive angles. He pressed his body against his opponent, absorbing the initial contact and mirroring every movement. He never leaped to contest a fake shot. He stayed planted on the hardwood, denying the airspace Jordan needed to operate. Playoff statistical logs from the spring of 1988 show the Chicago superstar's shooting percentage plummeted whenever he was guarded by the man from Louisiana. Why did the numbers drop only when Dumars was the primary defender? The answer lies in psychological warfare. Dumars never showed emotion, never reacted to a spectacular play, and never engaged in verbal sparring. This lack of response unsettled opponents who fed on anger. But this suffocating pressure was merely a rehearsal. In June of 1989, this exact precision would pull off the greatest heist in franchise history. To grasp the anomaly of Joe Dumars, look at the carnage happening around him every night. The Detroit Pistons were waging a psychological war against the league. Bill Laimbeer delivered clothesline tackles that belonged in a wrestling ring. Rick Mahorn used his frame to physically displace people. In the middle of this riot, Dumars operated like a trained surgeon trapped in a street brawl. He played defense with unrelenting intensity, bumping chests and fighting through screens. Yet he somehow managed to look innocent. It was a master class in deception, bending the rules to their breaking point. Financial disciplinary reports published by sports media during the 1988 to 1989 season reveal a startling fact. Joe Dumars received exactly 0 fines for unsportsmanlike conduct. In a locker room where players routinely handed thousands of dollars to the league for starting brawls, this pristine record is staggering. Was he really that clean, or was he a manipulator who knew how to hide his transgressions? His polite demeanor, respectful tone, and refusal to talk trash created an invisible shield. He built a reputation as the only honest man in a city of thieves. That reputation became his most dangerous weapon. Transcripts of post-game interviews from frustrated opponents documented bitter complaints. Rival guards stood in front of microphones and claimed referees turned a blind eye to the grabbing and holding committed by Dumars. Did his carefully crafted reputation literally buy illegal advantages? Opponents certainly believe so. They were exhausted by a man who repeatedly fouled them in the shadows, then politely handed the basketball back with an innocent expression. This invisible armor was about to yield the ultimate reward, setting the stage for a championship series where he would steal the crown. The stage was set for a collision of philosophies. On one side stood the glamorous Los Angeles Lakers, seeking a third consecutive championship. On the other side were the hated Detroit Pistons, desperate to prove their bruising style could conquer Hollywood. Experts predicted a long, grueling series. What actually happened was a merciless dismantling that shocked the sporting world. The Lakers suffered injuries to their backcourt, and the Pistons capitalized, sweeping the defending champions 4-0. The villains stormed the castle and burned it to the ground. As the final buzzer sounded, everyone expected Isiah Thomas, the emotional leader of the franchise, to be crowned the most valuable player. But when the league commissioner stepped up to the microphone, the announcement sent a wave of disbelief through the arena. The highest individual honor was awarded to the quiet defensive specialist, Joe Dumars. How did a man whose primary job was stopping the opposing team suddenly become a lethal offensive weapon? Official championship series protocols registered by the league show Dumars, operating at a terrifying level of efficiency. He averaged 27.3 points per game. He dismantled the Los Angeles defense, shooting over 57% from the field and demonstrating a flawless offensive repertoire nobody knew he possessed. Television broadcasting ratings from June of 1989 proved tens of millions of viewers tuned in to witness the final game. Were they watching in hopes of a miraculous Lakers comeback, or were they captivated by the dark fascination of watching the bad boys legitimize their reign? Joe Dumars stood at the pinnacle of the sporting world, hoisting the heavy golden trophy, but the warm glow of this triumph was tragically short-lived. Exactly 1 year later, in June of 1990, a devastating piece of news was delivered to the locker room that altered the course of his life forever. Defending a title breaks the spirit of most athletes. The playoff run of 1990 brought a different pressure to Detroit. The Pistons faced the Portland Trail Blazers in a grueling series. Joe Dumars carried the offense for a team running on empty, but far from the cameras, a private tragedy unfolded. His father battled a severe illness back in Louisiana. As the series moved to Portland for Game 3, his father's condition deteriorated. Local news reports and obituaries from June of 1990 reveal a chilling timeline. His father died on the exact afternoon of Game 3. This raises an unsettling question. How does a player compete in the most important game of the year while his family suffers such a loss? The answer is a secret pact formed in the arena corridors. Interviews given by his wife Debbie years later confirmed she received the phone call hours before tip-off. She contacted head coach Chuck Daly. Together, they made a monumental decision. They hid the news from Joe until the final buzzer. They isolated him, confiscating messages and intercepting anyone who might reveal the truth. For 2 hours, millions watched Dumars hit crucial shots, completely unaware his mentor was gone. Post-game reports noted Dumars was pulled into a private room immediately after the victory. When the door closed, the illusion broke. Dumars descended into quiet grief, but the Detroit Empire was already fracturing, leading directly to a televised meltdown exactly 1 year later. By the spring of 1991, the aura surrounding the Detroit Pistons vanished. The physical toll of 3 consecutive finals aged the roster. Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls finally learned how to overcome their tactics. The Bulls exacted revenge in the Eastern Conference Finals, sweeping the defending champions 4-0. As the clock ticked down in Game 4, the Detroit leaders made a collective decision that stained the franchise legacy. Led by Isiah Thomas and Bill Laimbeer, The core members deliberately walked off the floor before the game concluded. They marched past the Chicago bench without a single handshake. Raw broadcast footage from late May of 1991 presents a visual contradiction. While the vast majority of the roster stormed down the tunnel in retreat, Joe Dumars did the exact opposite. He did not join the desertion. He navigated through the celebration to shake hands and offer respect to the men who ended his dynasty. Why did the most disciplined soldier of the bad boys break ranks? Was he betraying his brotherhood, or was he the only man who retained his moral compass? Transcripts of retrospective interviews show Isiah Thomas attempting to justify the walk-off as the emotional culture of the era. He never once criticized Dumars for staying behind. Public documents painted a clear picture. The press praised Dumars as the sole beacon of sportsmanship in a despised organization. He proved his reputation was a genuine reflection of his character. But no good deed goes unpunished in corporate sports. This principled gesture carried an invisible price tag, costing Dumars the greatest honor of his career in the summer of 1992. The anticipation leading up to the Barcelona Olympic Games was unprecedented. International rules changed, allowing the United States to assemble a roster of professional superstars. The selection committee handpicked living legends to represent the country. It is widely documented that Isiah Thomas was excluded, a direct result of a boycott orchestrated by Michael Jordan. But while Thomas made headlines, a more perplexing mystery remained. Why was Joe Dumars left off the team? Finalized roster documents released by the Olympic Committee in the summer of 1992 reveal a glaring anomaly. Dumars possessed the exact skill set the team needed. He was an elite perimeter defender who never caused drama and had just won a Finals Most Valuable Player award. More importantly, he was deeply respected by Michael Jordan. Why was his name erased? Leaked memos published by sports journalists during the selection process point to a quiet corporate campaign. The league office orchestrated an effort to sanitize the brand of American basketball before presenting it to a global audience. Executives were terrified of the bad boys' reputation. Investigative reports detailing the committee meetings suggested the mere association with the Detroit franchise was toxic for corporate sponsors. They refused to risk tarnishing the pristine image of the Dream Team with reminders of physical violence. Was Dumars secretly punished simply for wearing the wrong uniform? The evidence points to a corporate blacklist. He was collateral damage in a public relations cleansing operation. Left off the flight to Barcelona, Dumars returned to the reality of Detroit, preparing to sign a new agreement that would transform his role from elite assassin to desperate savior. The Detroit Empire didn't collapse overnight. It crumbled under aging bodies and shattered egos. By the mid-1990s, the aura that paralyzed professional basketball evaporated. Head coach Chuck Daly left the sideline. Enforcer Bill Laimbeer stepped away. Dennis Rodman was traded, taking his chaos to another franchise. When the smoke cleared from the Bad Boys dynasty, one figure remained. Joe Dumars found himself isolated, surrounded by a new generation of athletes who cared more about highlights than defensive stops. He spent his career in the shadows of giants. Now, he was the veteran leader of a broken organization. Club payroll records from the mid-1990s paint a clear financial picture. Dumars consistently remained one of the highest-paid individuals on the roster. He secured multi-million-dollar agreements to stay in a city, losing its competitive edge. Why did a player with multiple championship rings choose to spend his final years surrounded by mediocrity? The answer was rooted in a quiet sense of obligation. In his autobiographical book, teammate Grant Hill dedicated chapters to describing how Dumars personally protected rookies from the predatory temptations of the league. Journalists frequently noted Dumars ran a survival school right in the locker room, teaching the next generation how to handle sudden fame. He transformed from a killer into a mentor, trying to salvage the franchise culture. He absorbed agonizing losses, standing in front of the media to protect struggling young players. But the physical toll of demanding defense was destroying his body. In the spring of 1999, Joe Dumars untied his shoes for the last time. He stepped away without a publicized farewell tour. The sporting world assumed the quiet gentleman would fade into a peaceful retirement. His departure was merely a calculated pause before he executed a shocking maneuver in the executive suite. A morally clean athlete was rare in the aggressive 1990s. The league desperately needed to clean up an image damaged by locker room brawls and legal troubles. Corporate executives in New York City needed a shining symbol of purity. They needed a respected figure who navigated the darkest corners of the league without compromising his integrity. A press release issued by league executives in the spring of 1996 unveiled a new accolade celebrating ethical behavior, the Sportsmanship Award. The most intriguing detail was hidden in the permanent charter documents. Those legal papers decreed the physical trophy would bear the name of its very first recipient. It officially became the Joe Dumars Trophy. This rare honor elevated him from a respected veteran to an untouchable saint. Looking at this corporate recognition through the lens of an investigation, a cynical question arises. Was Dumars truly the flawless gentleman corporate sponsors wanted? Or did he spend his career wearing a convincing mask? Did he strategically build an immaculate reputation to leverage for personal gain? Confidential memos circulating among sports agents quietly suggested having a major trophy named after you was the ultimate job security. He successfully branded himself as the conscience of the basketball world. Nobody could attack the motives of a man synonymous with fair play. This golden shield of public goodwill became his most valuable asset. While other retired superstars struggled to find relevance or lost fortunes to terrible investments, Dumars played a long game of corporate chess. Everyone believed the patron saint of sportsmanship was destined for a quiet life. But in the summer of the year 2000, Dumars shocked the establishment by returning to Detroit to orchestrate a multi-million-dollar betrayal from the front office. Transitioning from the locker room to the executive suite is a dangerous gamble. Brilliant players rarely possess the cold detachment required to manage salary caps and fire close friends. When the Detroit ownership group made a stunning announcement in the year 2000, the basketball landscape was paralyzed. They appointed Joe Dumars, a man with zero management experience, as the new president of basketball operations. He was handed the keys to a broken franchise and given unchecked authority to rebuild the roster. The polite gentleman who spent his career avoiding conflict was sitting in the biggest chair. The immediate question echoing through the sports media was whether the nice guy possessed the necessary cruelty to run a corporate machine. Transaction logs registered with the league office during the summer of 2000 delivered the answer with the force of an earthquake. Dumars executed his first major executive decision. It was a masterpiece of cold calculation. He shocked the fan base by trading away the beloved icon of the franchise, Grant Hill. Internal financial reports leaked later that summer showed this unpopular maneuver unloaded a crippling financial burden from the club's salary books, bringing in an unproven defensive specialist named Ben Wallace. Frantic reports published by sports journalists noted the city felt fundamentally betrayed. How could the man who personally mentored Grant Hill easily ship him away the second he obtained executive power? It was the exact moment the world realized the soft-spoken exterior was merely a useful illusion. Dumars, the executive, was vastly more dangerous than Dumars the player. He was devoid of sentimentality, willing to sacrifice the most popular player on the roster if mathematical models demanded it. This gamble eventually became the foundation of a new championship empire. But this early success bred a dangerous arrogance, leading directly to a catastrophic financial miscalculation in June of 2003 that would forever stain his legacy. The annual draft is a televised spectacle where wealthy franchises select collegiate athletes to save their organizations. The summer of 2003 presented a historic opportunity. The talent pool was considered the greatest collection of young stars assembled in a single generation. Sitting in the Detroit executive offices, Joe Dumars held the second overall pick. It was a ticket that guaranteed a decade of contention. He only had to announce the name of the famous scoring machine from Syracuse University. Yet, the name read off the card sent a shockwave of confusion through millions of viewers. Official draft protocols registered in June of 2003 document a baffling decision. Detroit bypassed the guaranteed American star to select an unknown 18-year-old center from Serbia named Darko Milicic. How does an analytical executive ignore thousands of hours of domestic scouting reports to gamble on a teenager who barely played professional competition? Leaked interview transcripts published years later by insiders brought a bizarre story to light. A private workout session was held in an empty gymnasium. Reports claimed Dumars was mesmerized by a physical demonstration by the European prospect, stating right then and there that he had just witnessed the future of the organization. This begs an investigative question. Was this legendary workout truly a display of athletic genius, or had the Detroit executive fallen victim to an illusion created by international sports agents? The media fiercely debated this gamble, questioning whether executive power caused the legendary player to lose his analytical grip. Selecting an unproven teenager over a guaranteed collegiate star was considered an act of corporate madness. This miscalculation could have ended his executive career if he had not miraculously orchestrated an unexpected mid-season player exchange months later. The basketball landscape of the early 2000s was dominated by expensive rosters built around single superstars. The accepted strategy was to spend tens of millions of dollars on one marketed individual and surround him with cheap pieces. Dumars rejected this financial model. Instead of chasing coveted free agents, he systematically collected the discarded outcasts of the league. He recruited players publicly labeled as disappointments, rebels, or untalented journeymen by rival organizations. He assembled a volatile roster of men who shared a collective chip on their shoulder. It looked like a rehabilitation clinic for broken careers. Official transaction logs from the winter of 2004 hold the crowning piece of this puzzle. In a three-team exchange finalized in February, Dumars acquired a controversial forward named Rasheed Wallace. Published interview transcripts of Detroit head coach Larry Brown revealed internal doubts about bringing an explosive personality into a locker room, just finding its rhythm. Why would an executive who built his brand on discipline deliberately introduce the most penalized player in the league? Was he trying to recreate the chaotic energy of the bad boys era he survived? Or did he possess hidden insight into how these broken pieces fit together? Reports published by major media outlets noted the locker room culture transformed overnight. The controversial forward did not destroy the team, he galvanized them. They forged a cynical bond among men rejected by the sporting establishment. They adopted a blue-collar philosophy, swearing to outwork and suffocate any opponent who stepped onto their floor. This puzzle of problematic individuals locked together to form the most synchronized defensive weapon the modern era had witnessed. This machine was primed for destruction, and in June of 2004, it systematically dismantled the most expensive corporate dynasty on the planet. The championship series of 2004 was marketed as a coronation. The Los Angeles Lakers assembled an expensive roster of legends. Media experts and odds makers confidently predicted a quick destruction of the Detroit Pistons. The blue-collar team of cast-offs was viewed as a minor speed bump on the road to a Hollywood parade. It was a televised clash between corporate wealth and unrecognized labor. Dumars sat in the executive suites, watching his creation step onto the brightest stage in professional sports. What unfolded over 5 games was a systematic public dismantling of an arrogant dynasty. Verified statistical data from that series exposes a defense that defies logical comprehension. Final league protocols confirm the expensive Los Angeles offense was suffocated, held to an average of less than 85 points per game throughout the series. How is it physically possible that a collection of the greatest scorers in history was neutralized by a group of men the rest of the league had given up on? The answer was hidden in the financial structure orchestrated by the quiet executive. Public salary reports from that season reveal the total combined monetary value of the Detroit starting lineup was a mere fraction of the astronomical payroll commanded by their opponents. Dumars proved that athletic intelligence, collective chemistry, and a shared grievance could overpower inflated corporate egos. He achieved the impossible. He transitioned from legendary player to unproven executive, and within 4 years built a championship empire on his own terms. The media universally hailed him as a front office genius for getting the terrifying gamble he took a year prior. He sat at the unquestioned pinnacle of the corporate sporting world. The mechanism he built seemed indestructible, but this triumph was merely the calm before a storm. Just a few months later, this exact roster would ignite the most violent and financially devastating public brawl in the history of American sports. The afterglow of a championship convinces executives they achieved perfection. Joe Dumars entered the autumn of 2004, validated by the sporting universe. His constructed machine functioned with precision. The league scrambled to copy his physical blueprint. But assembling a locker room filled with angry athletes creates a pressurized fault line. In November of 2004, during a regular season exhibition against Indiana, that fault line ruptured. It unleashed the darkest spectacle in the history of American professional sports. League press releases published in late November outlined unprecedented suspensions for multiple players on the Detroit roster. The defending champions were dismantled overnight. How does a team praised for collective discipline devolve into a mob clashing with spectators? Dumars was forced to sit in his suite and watch. The aggressive culture he cultivated turned against the franchise. The physical violence was bad, but the legal fallout threatened to bankrupt his pristine public image. Redacted court documents and civil lawsuits filed after the brawl revealed multi-million-dollar damage claims. They painted the franchise as a lawless entity. How could the man who had the league's sportsmanship trophy named after him sit at the center of a legal inferno? The media questioned whether Dumars lost control of the monster he created. He frantically attempted to restore order, issuing apologies and trying to rebuild the fractured culture. But the delicate mechanism of his roster was broken. This public incident shattered his executive confidence. Over the next seasons, his front office strategies devolved into a series of desperate financial miscalculations. The decline of a sports empire is usually a protracted slide fueled by arrogance and panic. By the late 2000s, the fearsome aura of the Detroit locker room evaporated. Head coach Larry Brown departed. The core group of veterans aged out of their prime. Cheering crowds disappeared, replaced by public frustration. Sitting in his isolated office, Dumars stared at the crumbling walls of his legacy. He had to orchestrate a rebuilding project. Instead of relying on patient scouting, he panicked. He recklessly threw tens of millions of dollars at illusions. Audited league financial reports from the summer of 2009 exposed a staggering volume of monetary commitments. The documents show the Detroit franchise signed 2 inconsistent offensive players, Ben Gordon and Charlie Villanueva, to guaranteed contracts totaling over $90 million. How could an executive who won a championship by avoiding bloated contracts authorize this irresponsible gamble on secondary talents? Articles published by sports economists during that period suggested Dumars was blinded by desperation. He was simply buying recognizable names to pacify an angry fan base. The catastrophic results were immediately apparent on the hardwood. Advanced statistical data from that season showed the offensive and defensive efficiency plummeted to historic lows. The expensive arrivals failed to integrate. The locker room descended into a fractured environment. The $90 million investment bought a front-row ticket to athletic irrelevance. The financial losses made the ownership group nervous. The executive walls closed in on the architect, but the ultimate scandal was yet to come, exploding into view when confidential internal documents mysteriously reached the national press. In the paranoid world of professional basketball, information is a guarded currency. The league office routinely circulates sensitive memorandums detailing financial rules and disciplinary actions. These documents are meant for the eyes of the highest-ranking executives, protected by legal agreements. But in the spring of 2010, a crisis erupted within the league headquarters. A connected national sports journalist began publishing spectacular insider reports. These reports contained verbatim quotes from strictly confidential memos. League executives were furious. They launched an aggressive internal investigation to find the corporate mole. Official disciplinary actions released by the league commissioner in the later months of 2010 presented staggering financial evidence. The league levied a rare fine of $500,000 directly against the Detroit organization for violations of confidentiality rules. The corporate press release declined to publicly name the individual responsible. But the truth tore through the sports media landscape. Reports published by top-tier sports lawyers explicitly stated the primary source of the corporate leaks was the president of basketball operations himself, Joe Dumars. How could this be true? The sporting world was paralyzed by the hypocrisy. How could the patron saint of sportsmanship, the man who meticulously built a reputation for integrity, operate as a manipulative informant? Was he deliberately leaking information to manipulate the media narrative and protect his failing tenure? The revelation shattered his carefully constructed mask. The $500,000 penalty was a permanent stain on an immaculate legacy. This public humiliation signaled the beginning of the end. The franchise was suddenly sold to a demanding billionaire ownership group, and Dumars' final days in the city were numbered. The collapse of a sports organization is usually a slow deterioration brought on by a vacuum of stability. For decades, Joe Dumars operated under the protection of a billionaire owner. When that owner died, the shield around the executive shattered. The franchise entered corporate limbo, searching for new financial backers. The quiet environment Dumars needed was replaced by an atmosphere where every decision was scrutinized by nervous investors. He was trapped, trying to construct a roster while the foundation was sold to the highest bidder. Ownership transfer documents from the spring of 2011 show the Detroit franchise was sold to a new investor for $325 million. Why would a new ownership group demanding immediate returns trust an executive who just embarrassed the organization with a corporate leak? Business analysts suggested Dumars was stripped of his autonomy. He was no longer permitted to build a gritty roster. The new ownership demanded recognizable superstars to sell tickets. He was forced to abandon the philosophy that brought him his triumphs. This pressure to deliver marketable entertainment resulted in the most mocked miscalculation of his career. Contract registries from the summer of 2013 show a fully guaranteed contract worth $54 million handed to an erratic player named Josh Smith. How could a brilliant defensive mind commit such a mathematical blunder? Sports networks tore the decision apart, destroying whatever credibility Dumars had left. The $54 million gamble failed spectacularly, plunging the team into a cycle of losses. By the spring of 2014, the man who dedicated his adult life to Detroit prepared to exit through the back door. When a legend of a franchise is forced out, you expect a public farewell. But the complicated legacy of Joe Dumars demanded a different departure. The city of Detroit was exhausted by financial failures. The ownership group was desperate to wash their hands of the executive. There was no grand celebration or tearful goodbye. Dumars was quietly ushered out, leaving behind a fractured organization. A sterile press release issued in April of 2014 announced that Joe Dumars was stepping down. This document sparks a cynical thought. How could a man who dedicated almost 30 years to a single city, delivering multiple championships, be discarded with a few sentences? Looking back at his enshrinement into the Basketball Hall of Honor in September of 2006, his legacy was supposed to be untouchable. But the brutal reality of sports is that yesterday's genius becomes today's scapegoat. Dumars packed up his office and retreated into a secretive exile. During this exile, journalists published retrospective analyses. Columns covering his 14-year executive tenure debated his impact. Was he a misunderstood genius betrayed by ownership, or a lucky former athlete exposed as a fraud? The truth remained hidden behind his trademark polite smile and public silence. The basketball universe assumed Dumars had permanently retired. But a man with his knowledge of corporate secrets does not simply disappear. The highest authorities in the sport had not forgotten his intelligence. Soon they pulled him back into the spotlight by handing him a controversial executive position. The highest executive offices of professional basketball operate like a private club where favors are traded and scandals are swept under the rug. If you gain entry into this inner circle, you are almost never permanently banished. When the authorities searched for a respected individual to enforce the rules, they did not look for a lawyer. They reached into the shadows of exile and brought back the last person anyone expected. The polite gentleman from Louisiana was preparing to step into the most scrutinized disciplinary role in the sport. The official league corporate directory updated in May of 2022 featured Joe Dumars back at the top of the hierarchy. He was appointed as the executive vice president of basketball operations. This appointment triggers a cynical question. How could the authorities hand disciplinary power to a man previously penalized with a $500,000 fine for leaking confidential memorandums? Independent investigators suggested the league was terrified of empowered athletes and desperately needed a ruthless enforcer to restore corporate order. The irony of this position is impossible to ignore. Public disciplinary memos distributed over the last few seasons bear the signature of Joe Dumars. His name is attached to hundreds of thousands of dollars in penalties and suspensions handed out to modern players. He is the ultimate judge and executioner of player conduct. Is it not a plot twist that a foundational member of the dirtiest defensive team in history is now responsible for policing the morality of the league? The quiet assassin who eliminated offensive players now possesses the power to break a career with a single stroke of his pen. This sets the stage for a final realization about the nature of his double life. When you examine this contradictory professional life, you confront an uncomfortable reality about success. We want to believe in fairy tales. We want our heroes to be flawless gentlemen who achieve glory through hard work. The journey of Joe Dumars shatters that illusion. He did not survive the most brutal era of basketball by being a nice guy. He survived and conquered the league by mastering a dangerous weapon, the illusion of innocence. He adapted to whatever environment he was thrown into, silently dismantling opponents while smiling for cameras. Enshrinement records from September of 2006 serve as a monument to his legacy. He was immortalized in the highest echelon of the sport. But when you read the official plaques presented on that evening, an investigative question arises. Why did the basketball establishment focus on his polite demeanor rather than his effectiveness as a defensive assassin? Were the authorities honoring a brilliant player or publicly canonizing the ultimate corporate survivor? Dumars successfully hid the darkest defensive tactics behind a marketable smile. He convinced the globe he was the moral conscience of a team of villains. He secured a legacy so pristine it blinded the public to his calculating nature. The irony of his public image is impossible to ignore. Annual press releases confirm the league still hands out an award called the Joe Dumars Trophy, designed to celebrate ethical behavior on the hardwood. Every year, a new generation of superstars accepts a trophy named after a man penalized $500,000 for secretly leaking confidential documents. It is the most successful public relations heist in the history of American athletics. The man who orchestrated the physical dismantling of players, traded away beloved icons, and betrayed executive trust is legally recognized as the symbol of sportsmanship. As we close the dossier on the architect of two championship empires, we are left with a final question. When you look at the journey of the quiet guard who became a terrifying executive enforcer, what do you actually see? Was Joe Dumars truly the only principled man trapped in a city of villains, or was he simply the greatest actor the sporting world ever witnessed?